We're looking at a piece today from the True I Speak podcast, specifically an expanded segment on the abuse of power in Morton PA. And what this text does almost immediately is dismantle the most stubborn myth we have about sexual violence, the stranger in the alley, the sudden physical overpowering. It argues that in communities, in institutions, the danger doesn't look like that at all. It looks like leverage.
It looks like the people you're supposed to trust. What struck me reading this, what genuinely unsettled me is how methodically it breaks down the way power operates before a crime even occurs. We have this collective fixation on the moment of physical violence, the climax of an assault. But this piece drags us backwards. It forces us to look at the months or even years of social conditioning, the surveillance, the boundary testing. When someone has enough institutional or community leverage, they don't need to use a weapon. The environment is the weapon. They build a cage out of the victim's own fears, fear of losing housing, fear of losing their kids, fear of just being called crazy. And that cage is completely invisible to anyone standing outside of it.
The statistics back that up completely. Data from the Department of Justice shows that about 73% of sexual assaults are perpetrated by a non-stranger. The stranger in the bushes is an anomaly. The reality is the boss, the community leader, the family friend.
Right, and that's exactly why the traditional advice we give people, carry your keys between your fingers, don't walk alone at night, is so dangerously misplaced, it puts the burden of prevention on the target while completely ignoring the actual threat vector. The threat is sitting across from you at a desk. The threat is the person who controls your paycheck or your social standing. The text we're looking at describes this as a slow, calculated process of psychological cornering. It starts with just watching. The predator figures out who supports the target, what embarrasses them, whether they're financially vulnerable. It's a predatory calculus. They are mapping the perimeter of this person's life to see where the fences are weak.
It's an architecture of coercion. But wait, I'm not sure that holds in every case. You're describing a mastermind scenario. A lot of toxic environments just have bad boundaries. Does that boundary testing always have this calculated trajectory toward sexual assault, or is it sometimes just run-of-the-mill workplace harassment that spirals?
I don't think it has to be conscious masterminding for it to be systematic. The abuser might not be sketching out a 10-step plan on a whiteboard, but the mechanism is still operating. They test a boundary, maybe an inappropriate remark or standing just a little too close. If the target doesn't push back, or if the environment doesn't punish the abuser for it, that becomes the new baseline. They push a little further. It's an escalation fueled by a lack of accountability. And the text points this out beautifully. The abuser is looking for the moment when resistance feels dangerous to the victim. They're waiting for the target to realize that if they complain, they're the ones who will be punished by the community. That's the conditioning phase. It's a systematic erosion of the victim's autonomy, often categorized as coercive control.
Which leads directly to the corruption of reality, the gaslighting. The abuser implying, look at who I am, look at who you are. Who are they going to believe?
That's the terrifying part. And it works because it's usually true. If the abuser has social leverage, if they are a protected family in a small town or a powerful figure in a church, they know the community will close ranks to protect them. This brings in Jennifer Freyd's research on institutional betrayal. She talks about how institutions and a tight-knit community or small town operates exactly like an institution, will often fail to respond supportively to wrongdoings, and in fact, will cover them up to protect their own image. The victim isn't just fighting the abuser, they're fighting the entire social structure that shields the abuser. That's what makes the silence manufactured. The victim looks around and realizes the people who should protect them are already compromised.
Freyd also coined DARVO, right? Deny, attack, reverse, victim, and defender.
Exactly. When the victim finally does speak up, the abuser denies the event, attacks the victim's credibility, calling them unstable or vindictive, just like the text mentions, and then claims that they, the abuser, are actually the victim of a smear campaign. And Freyd's research found that when bystanders aren't educated about DARVO, they tend to believe it. They side with power. They side with the status quo. So the victim's initial fear, nobody will believe me and I'll lose everything, is entirely rational. It's not paranoia. It's an accurate assessment of the social landscape.
So the assault itself, when it finally happens, isn't really about sex. It's the climax of the domination.
It's pure conquest. The text is so sharp on this. It says the abuser wants access without accountability. They want the victim's nervous system to submit to a reality the abuser created. By the time the sexual violence occurs, the victim is already completely boxed in. The compliance isn't consent, it's compliance under terror. And this is where the public fundamentally misunderstands trauma. People look at these cases, especially non-stranger cases, and ask, why didn't she scream? Why didn't she fight back?
I hear you, but I keep getting stuck on how this plays out in real time. Because from the outside, fawning or freezing can look exactly like cooperation. If someone is smiling, placating the abuser, staying in the room, how is a jury or even just a neighbor supposed to read that as terror?
That is the central tragedy of the fawn response. Our biological survival mechanisms are basically being weaponized against us in the courtroom and in the court of public opinion. When we talk about trauma responses, everyone knows fight or flight, but the freeze and fawn responses are actually far more common in sexual assault. Tonic immobility, the freeze response, is an involuntary state of paralysis where your brain decides that resisting will get you killed. Research shows that 70% of rape survivors report significant immobility during the assault. They physically cannot move or speak. And fawning is even more complex to explain to a jury. Fawning is a coping mechanism where the victim tries to appease the abuser to avoid further harm, smiling, complying, trying to keep the peace. It happens a lot when there's a massive power differential.
It's survival. Your brain calculates that fighting escalates the danger, so it shuts down the resistance.
Precisely. The nervous system prioritizes survival over everything else. It deadens the resistant impulses. But later, society, and often the victims themselves, look back at that appeasement and confuse it with consent. They think I must have wanted it because I didn't say no. But you can't think your way out of a survival reflex. The text we're analyzing captures this perfectly. It moves into paralysis, submission, appeasement, silence. It does not make it mutual. It makes it trauma. Under coercive conditions. We have to stop expecting victims to perform some cinematic, heroic resistance when their biology is forcing them into submission to keep them alive.
That shifts the focus back to the enablers. The text argues a rape culture isn't built just by rapists. It's built by the mockers, the silencers, the people protecting the community image.
The network of selfishness. That phrase really stuck with me. The abuser is the one committing the act, but they are relying on the cowardly neutrality of everyone else. The people who say, don't make trouble. The HR department that sweeps it under the rug. The church elders who suggest the victim needs to prey on it. Those people are active participants in the architecture of coercion. And the victim feels that network. They can feel who is looking away. That isolation is what makes the coercion possible. It's not just that the abuser is powerful, it's that the community has signaled they value the abuser's influence more than the victim's safety.
I don't know. That feels too clean to me. Calling it a network of selfishness implies everyone knows exactly what's going on and is consciously choosing evil. Sometimes people are just oblivious. They just don't see the coercion because it's not physical.
I'd argue the blindness is functional. Freud actually calls this betrayal blindness. People, witnesses, colleagues, even victims themselves will remain unaware of a betrayal because acknowledging it would threaten their own relationship with the institution or the community. If you admit that the beloved town mayor or the star employee is a predator, you have to do something about it. You risk your own job, your own social standing. So people subconsciously choose not to see it. It's not always a cartoonish, mustache-twirling conspiracy. Often it's just 100 people deciding simultaneously that it's easier to minimize the victim's discomfort than to confront the powerful person causing it. But the result is the same. The victim is trapped.
So the intervention has to happen before the violence. We have to look at the pattern. Who has leverage? Who has the ability to make truth feel dangerous?
We have to completely reframe our questions. Instead of asking, why didn't she leave? We need to ask, what conditions were created that made leaving impossible? We need to look for the coercive control. Was there isolation? Was there economic dependence? Was there stalking or humiliation before the sexual act? Because if we only focus on the physical act of rape, we are missing the entire system that facilitated it. Only about 31% of survivors even report sexual assault to the police. And of those cases, nearly 98% of perpetrators walk free. The system, as it stands, is designed to fail victims of coercive, power-based abuse.
It treats a systemic issue as an isolated incident. The text from True I Speak is demanding that we stop pretending the danger only exists when there's blood or a stranger in the dark.
The danger is the respected face, the connected person, the group that knows exactly how to make someone afraid to speak. That's the core truth of this whole discussion. When a community chooses image over truth, it becomes a hunting ground. We have to value protecting the vulnerable more than protecting the reputations of the powerful. It requires immense courage from bystanders to break that silence, to refuse to be part of that network of enablers.
It changes how we view every power dynamic. These ideas, rooted in the realities of institutional betrayal and coercive control, force us to look closer at our own communities. Take these ideas and look at the environments around you. Talk about them. Naming the coercion is the first step in dismantling it.